What happens when Bret Hart finally sits down face to face with Vince McMahon after the death of Owen Hart? The death of Owen Hart in May of 1999 wasn't just a tragedy for wrestling fans. It ripped the entire Hart family apart and left a permanent scar on professional wrestling. In the middle of lawsuits, grief, and anger, Bret Hart and Vince McMahon managed to have a private meeting. But this wasn't just any meeting. Years later, Bret would discover that Vince had actually been wearing a wire, with police secretly listening to their entire conversation. So what really happened in that emotional sit-down between Bret Hart and Vince McMahon? And what does it reveal about both men in one of wrestling's darkest chapters? Let's rewind to how this meeting even came about.
I gather the police are saying that the cable didn't break. That raises two possibilities here. Either that the harness wasn't properly connected as he lowered from the roof of the Kemper Arena, or that he may, as some now have suggested, actually accidentally triggered the separation mechanism.
Well, I think I don't know what exactly happened. I don't think anybody knows.
Bret finally agreed to meet Vince, suggesting a quiet, secluded spot in Calgary where he liked to sit and think. At the time, Bret thought this would be a private moment between two men who had gone through hell together. Bret Hart opened the conversation by asking Vince what happened. Vince said he didn't know any details because he had been in makeup when the accident occurred. Bret gave him a warning. Martha Hart was likely going to sue. Vince appreciated the heads up, and then Vince asked if he should visit Bret's father, Stu. Bret told him to wait until after the funeral. Bret knew how high tensions were at the Hart house. Just that very morning, Bruce Hart and Ellie Hart called for Vince's head. This is interesting because later on, both Bruce and Ellie would take the side of Vince McMahon. Maybe they were putting on a show for the family in that moment, or maybe as more details became known and tempers calmed down, they changed their minds on who to place blame on. Years later, a Calgary police officer told Bret something shocking. Vince had actually hired the police to watch the meeting, worried that Bret might get violent. And if that wasn't enough, Vince even wore a wire, so the whole thing was recorded. The officer told Bret he listened to every word, and he was actually impressed by how composed and candid Bret was that day. Even at his lowest moment, Bret showed grace, while Vince showed paranoia. Why didn't Vince stop the show? Bret, while sitting across from Vince, asked the question everyone from the family, pro wrestlers, and fans have asked for decades now. Why was the show not stopped? Vince told him he didn't know what to do, and that he was afraid the crowd might riot if the event was canceled. Bret scoffed. He asked Vince point blank, if it had been Shane who fell to his death, would you have stopped the show? Vince just looked away and repeated to himself, I didn't know what to do. Bret Hart never bought the riot excuse, and honestly, most fans don't either. Vince goes on to tell Bret there isn't a day he doesn't regret what he did to Bret in Montreal during Survivor Series 1997. The betrayal that had destroyed their relationship just a year and a half earlier. Vince even told Bret he should come back to the World Wrestling Federation, that he had put the belt on him again, and he would have a storyline ready immediately. But Bret turned him down. He had just signed another WCW contract and wasn't going back. Even in tragedy, Vince was still the promoter, always pitching, always looking for the storyline. What did Vince offer to mend the rift? Bret Hart asked for access to his video library. He didn't want his legacy erased. He wanted his career remembered. Looking back, Bret admits that might sound calculated to bring up in the middle of such a meeting, but to him, it was important. Martha Hart was holding a grudge against Vince McMahon for her husband's death, and she confided in Bret to handle many different things before enduring the funeral of Owen Hart. Bret Hart wanted this meeting with Vince to find some sort of closure, even if it felt like he was going against his family and Owen's wife, Martha, to get it for his own personal and mental well-being. The two men ended up talking for 2 hours. When it was over, they shook hands and said goodbye. Bret walked away feeling lighter, like if the police didn't hold Vince accountable, then maybe he could find it in himself to forgive. Bret Hart and Vince McMahon's relationship will always be complicated, bound by betrayal, tragedy, and respect. That meeting didn't solve anything, but it gave Bret some peace. This meeting after Owen Hart's death revealed a lot about both men. Bret's grace in the middle of pain, and Vince's constant mix of guilt, fear, and business instinct. It wasn't the end of their story, and it was a rare glimpse into who they really were when the cameras weren't rolling. Make sure you have the bell clicked and you are subscribed so when I go live every Sunday night at 6 Eastern, you'll get a notification. I'll play CWA Memphis Wrestling as we make our way through 1989. Also, if you enjoyed this video, check out the untold story of why Mean Gene Okerlund hates Vince McMahon. You can check that out right here.